All right, everybody, we're going to start our next panel on responsible regulation. Of course, the U.S. has been still in the nascent stages of growth. Other markets have been much more mature and have seen ebbs and flows in the regulatory environment, so we're very excited to touch on this topic here. Each of you sit in different areas, I think, of the broader gaming ecosystem, but of course tied to responsible gaming. Clearly, as I said, this is a key component of the broader industry. I guess, how has responsible gaming evolved, and where are you most focusing your time? Maybe we'll start here and work down the line. We can also introduce ourselves, although, as I said, I think it's all on the website, but yes. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Cait DeBaun, Vice President of Strategic Communications and Responsibility at the American Gaming Association. And it's been a really fun time to have this job. I started at the AGA in 2019, and I think nothing to do with me, but the kind of increase in conversation and interest and focus around responsible gaming has just grown significantly in that period and will continue to, and that reflects the growth of the legal market. You know, as legal gaming grows, so does our commitments, and so does the commitment of the broader ecosystem, tying back to the conversation you were just having with the leagues. There's more people interested in this because it's how we grow a sustainable marketplace. So it's been fun to be a part of that growth and continue to see where the interest lies and how we can raise the standard for the U.S. industry to kind of set us on the right path.
Good morning, everyone. James Kilsby, I'm the Chief Analyst and VP Americas with VIXIO GamblingCompliance. VIXIO is an independent regulatory intelligence provider, since monitoring regulatory trends affecting the online gambling industry over the past 15 years, I just echo Cait's view, but also on a global scale, we have absolutely seen emphasis on responsible gambling by the industry, by operators and suppliers, but by government policymaker level and by regulators, has ratcheted up significantly in Europe and other parts of the world, certainly over the past five years or so. And the conversation I think we have today is how does that similar dynamic play out in North America? Right.
Hello, everybody. My name is Martin Lycka. I've only moved to this country some 18 months ago, so my Long Island accent's still not really coming along, so that's what you will get. Thanks for having me. First of all, I'm with Entain. I'm their SVP for American Regulatory Affairs, and even more importantly, responsible gambling, which is relevant for the debate today. Entain, if you don't happen to know, owns 50% of BetMGM, so that is the flagship brand in this country, and 20 plus other brands all around the world. First of all, let me say thanks for sticking around. We all love sports, and we all love the leagues. It's a very, very important conversation, but you guys, if I may put it that way, you truly love the leagues, because our sustainability, as well as their sustainability, depends, I may be biased, but depends on the single most important issue that our industry, to Cait's and James's point, has been dealing with lately. And that is its sustainability. That is responsible gambling. How can we go about making sure that while we're on that mad dash from yet another newly regulated US market to another, and fingers crossed there'll be more online casino once amongst them in a foreseeable future, perhaps not this year, but in the years to come, how we can make sure that besides being in a position to offer the most exciting, the most attractive portfolio of products, we also crucially and critically do it in a sustainable and responsible fashion. So that's where I'm coming from when it comes to responsible gambling, and indeed, to echo the comments of my fellow panelists, I'm delighted to report that a number of legislators, regulators, organizations represented on this panel, including operators, have really taken all this on, and there are more and more responsible gambling-related initiatives being launched, and not only because March is the Problem Gambling Awareness Month. It's a year-long effort. So thanks again for having me.
Okay, so hi guys, my name is Catie Stefano. I'm the Director of Community Marketing at onlinegamblers.com. And it's so weird to sit here in Responsible Gambling Month to talk about responsible gambling. It's really cool. And Women's International Day, right? So my journey, I started out in customer support 12 years ago at Betsson. So I've worked my way up from customer support, I think I lost my sound for a little bit, to VIP and CRM. So I've seen different verticals of gaming. And I think in the beginning, 12 years ago when I started out, it wasn't that much awareness about responsible gambling. So to echo my panelists, there's a lot more awareness right now, and I think it's great they're doing more training for all employees in the industry, whether you work with payments or you work with marketing, you have to learn about responsible gambling. And how it's evolved, I think there's a lot of technology now, like AI, that can give you signals of players who have very common signals that they could be addicted. We could warn them, we could be proactive, and we can educate them more now.
So maybe before we jump into some specifics about where the industry might go, it'd be helpful just to even how you think about defining what responsible gambling is, because I think that you could look at the data in a bunch of different ways. So what are the ways that you specifically would say this is what we want to go for in terms of defining what responsible gambling looks like?
It's something that we talk a lot about at the AGA when we think about introducing people to responsible gambling. And I think of this on a spectrum. On the one end is responsible gaming education and the tools and resources that you provide to customers to create a positive play experience where they're doing this for fun and entertainment, and they know what they're doing. And we have a game plan campaign which is centered around knowing the odds, setting a budget, keeping it social, playing with legal operators. And that is really where the industry spends a lot of their time focused, because it's a place there they can interact with their customer. And then the other side of it is problem gambling, and often those two words are interchanged, and they're very different things. And I think it's an important foundation for this conversation to realize that and kind of make that our baseline, because on the problem gambling side, that's where people need help, and we want to make sure there's this resources and support to get them the help they need. But it's not the place where the industry funds a lot of those resources, the majority of them. But they're very distinct parts of this conversation, and I think it's something that we all need to have a level setting around as we engage in this conversation and becomes more prominent across the industry.
Anybody have anything to add to that? Or
I would just agree with Cait's point. This is a multifaceted topic that involves research, psychological, academic research that is very much an area of specialism and expertise. The only other thing you mentioned, problem gambling, responsible gambling, primarily in the UK, but we've also seen a shift, Martin, to the term safer gambling, which I guess to potentially oversimplify that an emphasis as well on gambling being offered in a safer way for the consumer, whereas responsible gaming, we see that the consumer is empowered to take responsibility and engage with gambling in a safe way. So there's a mix of what the gambling offer is, how educated the player is, and then sort of treatment and support for those that do enter into areas. And those, you mentioned, Cait, those three different parts of the triangle can often get mixed up and seen in different ways. And I think that's where we, I don't know, Martin, if you'd agree with that, that's where you get difficulty on a policy side, is where those three things are confused.
Yeah, absolutely. What I was going to say is that I was a lawyer once. And as a junior lawyer, as you can imagine, they asked me to do all the work nobody else wanted to do, including contractual definitions. So I did a lot of that work, and despite that, I would still struggle, so we are somewhat struggling to define what responsible gambling actually is. To my mind, it's allowing our patrons or our customers to enjoy themselves on our sites or in the land-based casinos without inflicting any harm on themselves. And yes, the guys are absolutely right. Problem gambling focuses on gambling addiction and how that can be prevented. Responsible gambling, I don't want to be confusing anybody, but because there's an overlap, if not a blur, but responsible gambling empowers customers, and to my mind, that's what it's all about. it empowers customers to make the right choices on the basis of data, information, and other intelligence they get from us as the industry. That onus is on us, but what still tends to get somewhat neglected or underestimated is the role of the patron or role of the customer. Because we're not sitting there with the customer. We need to put them in that position to make the right choice and keep a very close eye on what they're doing, and especially online or internet technology leans itself towards doing that, but you can't force them, can't physically force them to always make the right choice. So really what I'm trying to say, and that's the final point about safer gambling. You know, it's not safe gambling. It's as safe as it gets, but it is ultimately, I appreciate that's a British term, safer gambling in the sense that the customers got the information, the tools, they're doing the monitoring, they're advising the customer if required what to do, but it's just like the whole offering, it's customer-centric and it's customer-focused. So that's how, maybe a convoluted definition, but that's my vision of responsible gambling, if that makes sense, any sense at all.
Yeah, I think these guys said everything, but I think what I can just go back to is the sustainability. I think that's very important for players and for any company working in iGaming, that they educate on responsible gambling to only get sustainable players long term.
So I guess let's turn to what the market might look like in the future by looking at what we've learned from other markets. And we can start anywhere. Maybe we'll start in the middle with James this time. But I guess what are some of the learnings from what we've seen in the UK in terms of how regulations and responsible gaming has evolved and what that could mean here?
Yeah, well, we can't really deny that there's been a realignment of regulation, not just in the UK, but across Europe. To some extent in Australia. So really, a very clear trend is that regulations around responsible gaming have become a lot more prescriptive in more mature online gambling markets that have been around somewhat longer than the the post-PASPA era here in the States. What that means different things in different markets. There is no one, no jurisdiction has stumbled upon a sort of a globally definitive solution in this area, but it means a couple of things as we look at the European market and compare it to the States, and maybe we can come back to what may come across the Atlantic, what wouldn't be appropriate. But we're starting to see very harsh restrictions on advertising in some European markets. There's a kind of an adjacent issue to what we're talking about today, but absolutely, advertising has been a chief focus. Italy and Spain, well known, have essentially imposed full blanket bans on gambling advertising. Restrictions on bonuses. So various countries have capped the amount that can be offered as a bonus, or banned banned the ability to offer bonuses as a means of acquiring or retaining customers. Restrictions on products. So specific features in primarily on the casino side, but banning certain game features. That's something that's creeping in. And then a big one is really trying to limit the amount that gamblers can lose. More countries are considering deposit limits on a monthly basis or similar, which is really puts a hard limit on the amount of revenue that can be generated by the market. So there's a mix of different things all going on in different markets in Europe, and we're just starting, I think, to see some conversation in North America about certain bits of those, and I think some more likely to become a real conversation on this side of the Atlantic than others. But it's the trend from Europe is clear, and I don't think there's, to my mind, I don't think there's much doubt that we will see policy and regulation on responsible gambling evolve in the States. New Jersey, Colorado, and others have already started that process. So a lot of change in Europe that is going to be discussed, I think, and contextualized for a North American market as we've seen such a rapid growth.
So I think Sweden is a very good example of what can cause a bigger black market. So they restrict, just like you said, on bonuses. So there's no retention promotion allowed. So a lot of players feel like if they gamble a lot, they don't really get anything back from it. So instead, why should I play with a legal operator when I don't get anything back? Yeah, let's see. And then I think another example is Spain. So I live in Spain, as many know. Spain has restricted the sports sponsorship on teams. So teams like Barcelona and Real Madrid, they're struggling right now because they can't get any sponsorships from big betting companies like they used to. And I think the UK is also looking to that. But a country, I think, I don't hold me to this, but I think it's Latvia that is having very good regulations about that. They have to only have one-time bonus wagering on everything to make it clear for players. And there's also one person from each company that has to be accountable, that they're following all the legal terms, or that person will go to jail. So I think that's very, very good regulation that we can look to. There's also Colombia that has a certain amount of money goes to the health department in Colombia. So when they gamble, tax revenue helps support hospitals, ambulances, and they do a lot of marketing around betting legal is betting on the health of Colombians. So I think that's some regulations that we can look to as well, rather than just the bad ones. I would say Sweden and Spain.
Yeah, I think it's coming along rather nicely even in this country. By the way, very slick Formula 1 tire change. That was amazing. So James is back with us, which is always much appreciated. But going back to the point, and you touched up on it, the likes of, as usual, I might be biased because I live there, but New Jersey's led the way on beefing up responsible gambling standards, and hot on the heels, you have Colorado, Ohio, Massachusetts are figuring out their new responsible gambling policies, and in my view, they have a very robust responsible gambling program they have applied across their land-based casinos. So they're actually now trying to wrap their heads around as to how that could work in the online space and in the sports betting space. There's clearly, because the focus of this session is on investment, more and more money is being invested into responsible gambling, both by operators, and I happen to have spoken to the Colorado regulator, Dan Hartman. Yesterday, they created, or their legislature created, a $1.5 million fund that is earmarked for responsible gambling purposes. New York got that in their budget, and so on and so forth. So that's the regulatory and legislative side of things. Of course, we'll not be stealing Cait's thunder and talk about have a game plan. Great program, and we're part of it, and we're proud of that. But besides legislation and regulation, that of course we've got to abide by, or live or die by, then the industry, and I've had the honor and pleasure, without trying to toot my horn too much, led a group of arguably the biggest US-facing sports betting operators that got together and put out a set, or a responsible gambling pledge. Effectively, it's a set of 12 responsible gambling principles that we have been and will be living up to. So that's a convoluted way of saying that there's a strong element of self-regulation as well. And of course, finally, and hopefully, it will be a good segue to what I suspect you might want to be talking about, and James touched up on it as well, and that's responsible advertising. Lots of press, lots of ink's been spilled on it, lots of press articles have been written about that, and even there are a few congressmen in DC who now seem to have taken issue with it and are even proposing a blanket advertising ban, which, by the way, I think would be, to your point, totally counterproductive. But there is clearly a need, a dire need to address this issue. Perhaps the volume of advertising, you wouldn't necessarily want Patrick Mahomes or Kevin Hart to be offering you gambling products left, right, and center. It may be entertaining, but ultimately the public might get fed up with that. So that's, in my view, one of the two key issues to address, the other one being the content of the advertising in the sense of offering the so-called free bets. With all due respect, there's no such thing as a free bet. That's an oxymoron. Bonus bets, yes, there are bonus bets. I like FanDuel's take on it, no sweat bet. That long story short, I think what we have to make sure as an industry is that we're not misleading customers. And then we'll have a lot of wiggle room, that we're not leading people to believe that if they spend $5, they will automatically qualify for the $3,000 that is being advertised. So those two key issues, I think that coupled with using advertising for responsible gambling messaging, just like we pretty much all started doing, is the way of ensuring that this industry has a sustainable future. Have I teed it up nicely for you?
I have so many things to say. I think there's a few things to pick up on here. You know, one, the legal versus illegal marketplace is a real key thing to talk about here, and regulators understand that. We need to find that balance between regulation that protects customers while allowing a competitive, thriving marketplace, because the more you close off the marketplace, the more people just go to the illegal market where there's no protections, no tax dollars to problem gambling services or responsible gaming education. And so that's something that we always come back to, that as we were fighting the illegal marketplace, this is a core issue as part of that. If I had $1 for every time I've been asked over the last 4 years, but what about UK? I'd be on the investor side of this conversation, because it's an interesting place where we've learned a lot, and I think you've seen that over the last 5 years and how we've rolled out responsible gaming and sports betting. You know, the AGA and our members came out with their responsible marketing code for sports wagering a year after the PASPA decision. We've continued to elevate that, and hopefully in the coming weeks we'll be announcing some new updates to that, because the intention was for it to evolve with the marketplace. This is a new marketplace in the US, and we need to make sure that our promises and our commitments align with the marketplace today, not the marketplace where we set out these codes of conduct. And on the topic of codes of conduct, you know, the other thing to think about is responsible gaming is not new to the US industry. You know, the U.S. industry has led responsible gaming in the brick and mortar setting for decades. You know, the first helpline was created by Harrah's in the 1990s, and so it's not as if we're all just, you know, picking up the responsible gaming book and learning about this for the first time because there's now mobile wagering. And as you know, the industry continues to innovate in this space. You know, credit to BetMGM and the Entain and MGM team, where, you know, they're using AI and other technology to create a better experience for responsible gaming, and that's what's really informing best practices that regulators are rolling out. It's, you know, a lot of it, the headlines are regulators implement new best practice, or you know, are kind of forcing the industry to do X, Y, and Z, when the reality is those best practices are informed by things that are already happening and technology that's already being utilized to help advance responsible gaming. So I think this is a lot of industry-driven protections that are in place, and, you know, perhaps we just need to talk more about all the great things we are doing, because there is a lot happening here, and it is resulting in regulation that, you know, advances customer protections while also creating a competitive marketplace.
So maybe a follow-up on that. I guess, what are some of the other misconceptions from regulators' standpoint? How does the information bubble up to them when we start hearing about some of these either proposals being put out there, and what are some of the, you know, maybe downstream risks if bad regulation is put into place?
On the regulatory side, you know, I think we have a really collaborative relationship across the U.S. with regulators. You know, they seek out input. They want to understand how what they're proposing impacts, you know, the marketplace in both positive or negative ways. There's some states that have been mentioned here, Massachusetts, New Jersey, who are, you know, leaders in this space and have set regulations that are really thoughtful about how they've gone about it. I think some of the kind of broader, you know, it was mentioned the Tonko bill in the House, and, you know, we take that as a real threat, because, you know, advertising being banned is a serious problem for a lot of parts of this business. But I think some of that is education and understanding what is happening. So, for example, in advertising, sports betting advertising by volume declined last year. It's getting more national in scope. It's not as integrated on TV, and so this is a maturation of the market. You're going to see, as we grow and as the market becomes more national in scope, there's going to be shifts as we've acquired customers and we change how we, retain them. So it's all something that at the AGA we take very seriously, but I think we have good answers when those questions are raised.
I think you make the right point there, Cait, that the generally speaking, I think the regulators are open-minded and collaborative, and taking the subject seriously, but without with wanting effectiveness. The danger that you've got to separate between our policies are separate between regulators and legislators, where I think there potentially is a bigger risk that we have seen in other countries is where lawmakers establish mandates on regulators to implement things that are challenging. So that's I think that's an area that the industry, particularly over here, is well engaged with it as well. And I do think we'll. I don't think the AGA and others. It makes sense here that not pushing back on responsible gaming and looking to introduce new initiatives and new things. Just saying, we're not doing that would not work, because lawmakers will raise questions, and it's the industry can either present its own answers or have answers imposed upon them, really. And I think generally the industry is well aware of that and is putting coming onto the front foot.
Yeah, absolutely. It does come down to show and tell. It might sound obvious and straightforward, but there are a lot of businesses in that space that indeed continue developing new technology and evolving what they've got. So then we would go and show it to the regulators, sound out their views, figure out whether that would or would not work in their particular jurisdiction. Cait's point about the UK, yes, I wish I could share in your fund. Because, yeah, UK, it's out there, but it's a different jurisdiction. Like in this country, I haven't spent that much time here just yet, but it's 50 different states, different cultural idiosyncrasies. What would work in Massachusetts would not necessarily work in Iowa or Nebraska. So all this needs to be thrown into the mix. And to give you but one example, and I'll stick to what I know, so the Entain's example, we've developed, we'd like to think, a very robust program that revolves around a combination of training, both internal and external, and use of technology, the likes of machine learning, AI. But what we've also tried to bake into those protocols and the system are indeed the cultural idiosyncrasies. Because what works in the UK might not work in Spain, or it would not work in Spain because people are different. And as I've already said, what may work in one state would not necessarily work in another state. And of course, on top of that, I think we sort of might need to stop being shy or get better at promoting what we have already done, what we've already accomplished. You get to see lots of press releases. I will sound like a broken record, in particular during PGAM, for a good reason, but we need to continue promoting the great work that we're doing as an industry, and actually the AGA, to give them the credit they deserve. You guys have been collating these examples and presenting them on our behalf. It's not as though there was this one operator. Some operators do more, some operators do enough, could be perhaps doing more, but everybody's doing a lot in this space, so we do need to go and present it by all the means possible, of course, press releases, but going beyond that, The RG champions, Caesars have been using the Manning brothers. We've been working the likes of Charles Oakley, Amani Tuma, and many others. DraftKings got a great campaign with celebrities out there who promote responsible gambling. So they're not paying them to give them a shout out for their one-of-the-kind sports betting products. No, they're talking about responsible gambling. There are lived experienced folks out there who travel up and down the country, for example, throughout our partnership with the NCAA, and educate college students not about how to gamble and bet, far from it, They're educating them, or they're telling them about their story, so that one day, if they do choose to gamble, because they'll have to be over 21 years of age, they've got all the information to make the right choice. So I suspect, without trying to make this too controversial, that if we continue doing that, perhaps one day even the likes of the Times might start writing nice articles about us. That may be a very naive hope, but there you go. I'm a dreamer.
You're a dreamer.
Yeah. No, I think also, like, thinking about Spain and looking at that, like, if it would be a ban on sports betting sponsorship, that would be detrimental in some states. Because not only, like, in Spain, where there's some teams, in the US, you see a lot of sports betting sponsorship on leagues as well. So if that would stop in the US, it could be very detrimental to certain teams that are based in states if that regulation would happen. And going back to what Martin said about celebrities and ambassadors, I don't know the answer to this, but just going out on the streets now in New York, think about if we would show them a logo of, let's say, PlayStar and PointsBet, who are legal licensed in the US, and let's say Stake with Drake, you know, and Roobet with Snoop Dogg, and we show these 4 logos and ask people on New York which 2 of these 4 are legal, which one would you think they would say?
Stake.
I don't think people will say PlayStar, for example, but they're legal and licensed.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe a follow-up on this, because there's clearly differences across geographies, across states. Another delineation that I often think about is iGaming versus sports betting. Maybe if you can talk to how each of you think about those 2 segments and what responsible gaming maybe means to each, and how regulation and responsible gaming efforts might differ looking at those 2 categories.
Yeah, but I believe the foundations need to be and are meant to be the same. And I totally understand why the regulator and legislative processes when it comes to iGaming, as well online casino and sports betting, have been dissociated. But in an ideal world, just like in Ontario, right across the border, they would have been regulated together. But then my personal opinion is that when, as an industry, we did sports betting, it wasn't easy, but it was largely straightforward, because there was a great story, the Supreme Court decision as the initial trigger, then the leagues and other sports jumped on the bandwagon and created all that hype, plus, and I can't read legislators' minds, perhaps I should be able to do it as a regulatory affairs guy, but I still can't, still trying to figure that out. They were asked to regulate that one thing, sports betting. And fair play to the 7 states that have regulated iGaming, online casino. But now if you look at, all due respect, the likes of Indiana and the other states that have been trying their hand with it, and fingers crossed, well, New York, will New York get it across the line? I'm hopeful, but we shall be wiser in the next few weeks. But the point I'm trying to make is, and that's why Indiana's the case in point in my view, Indiana dropped an iGaming bill, and all of a sudden, iLottery want to be regulated. I do see why, when they want to be regulated, and the video gaming terminals, and everybody started to piggybacking of it and free riding on that bill, which made it messy. And secondly, from the pure responsible gambling perspective, first of all, sports betting has a great story and is generally perceived as less dangerous than online casino. But there's no research that would bear this conclusion out. Granted, if you're playing, perhaps I shouldn't be saying that, but if you're playing some of the online slots games, that's a bit brainless, especially if you have it on auto spin. But actually, we did, I believe Playtech did, Charmaine may correct me if I'm wrong, if she's still in the room, but Playtech did some research to the effect that auto spin actually makes you pause and think, because it's turning around and you realize, do I really want to do this? I probably want to stop because there is no fun in it. So long story short, I suppose the industry is in a position, and that's the message and the moral of the story, the industry is in a position to address any responsible gambling risks associated with online gambling. And to Cait's point about black market, I strongly believe that we will be in a much better place if more than those 7 states go and regulate online gambling, because that will help drive out the illegal operators based of tiny little rocks in the Caribbean.
I would add that the differentiation comes from understanding the customer. So the sports betting customer is not always the iGaming customer, it's not always the brick and mortar customer, and so we need to think about just how we market to them differently. How do we adapt responsible gaming to meet what they need and how they think about the product they're engaging with, and that's applying the smarts we have in our marketing departments and data departments to responsible gaming. And then the one real opportunity I see, though, is taking all the tools and technology that have kind of innovated responsible gaming in the mobile space and extending those back to brick and mortar. Brick and mortar responsible gaming sometimes is still how far is the ATM from the casino floor, and that's not actually based on any research, and research is a big opportunity across the board in terms of understanding what prompts and interventions and nudges are going to help encourage responsible play. But I think the things we've invented and created in startups are plenty in this space for mobile gaming, seeing how we can apply those digitally, especially or in brick and mortar, especially as payments technology changes in the casino and we can interact and engage with our customer in a different way.
Yeah, I agree with those points. I think to Martin's point that there are some differences, right? iGaming versus sports from an RG perspective. Looking at particular features within games, which is something that Ontario has mirrored some of the UK restrictions on, not currently in the States. But yeah, fundamentally, many of the programs, policies can be applied equally, but we can't get away from the fact that there's a perception difference from a responsible gaming and a problem gambling point of view when you differentiate between iGaming and sports betting. And Indiana is a good example of that. Senate majority leaders and House speakers, which are the real key personalities that are going to get iGaming over the line in certain states, they were readily willing to give floor time, or if not sponsor bills for sports betting within a year or two of the PASPA ruling, and there's not the same appetite at their level of being as actively engaged in driving a train for iGaming, and it's a difficult thing to counter, because iGaming and online casino is just perceived differently to sports betting in the minds of lawmakers, even though you talk about New Jersey's responsible gaming best practices have been applied. They apply equally really to internet gaming and sports betting. The fundamental product is the same. So this is a major reason why it's 7 states for iGaming, and getting up to 35 plus now for sports betting is this perception.
The other part of it is the leagues have played a real role in shaping responsible gaming for sports betting. I think it's an underappreciated part of the conversation where each league has rules in terms of what advertising looks like, what their requirements are of their operator partners, and it's another standard that is being set to oversee responsible gaming in the space, and they've all stepped up to their part in this conversation around whether it's funding research or the national helpline or responsible gaming education. They're all NHL, MLB, NBA, NFL, NASCAR, PGA Tour doing their part to contribute to this conversation, and I think that provides another layer of comfort, for lack of a better term, to policymakers when they're considering sports betting versus iGaming.
And also the league and team owners tend to have Senate majority leaders on speed dial and what have you.
You said it, not me.
They have those.
Well, you could argue the brick and mortar casino companies may as well.
Also true. And then, but I do agree. I think the leagues have. That is a point of difference to the UK. Again, coming back to that, asking about the UK, there are many things about the US that are different, and the role of the leagues is, from a sort of policy shaping point of view, is very different in the States than any. Maybe in Australia, they're also quite embedded, but other countries just don't. It's not like for like comparison on that front.
And you briefly touched on Canada. I guess how has the process there trended versus your expectations, and what do you think's next as we think about maybe moving beyond Ontario and what that could look like?
Martin obviously is Entain's active in.
I've been
a couple of
volunteered.
different- yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think Ontario's done really well, I suppose. Not everybody in the industry would agree with all the features of the regulation, but I believe they've done the sensible thing that reflected the fact, of course, that's different from the US for obvious reasons, but they baked in the fact that operators had been in the market prior to the market being regulated, so they found a way of, I'd like to think, satisfying both sides of the divide. The operators that had serviced the market for quite a while and the operators that entered, so mainly the US-based operators that entered the market upon launch, they, and we've already talked about that, they did regulate the full portfolio of products. Again, legislatively speaking, would have been different from the US, and the regulation, just like here, got support from the big sports franchises. And yes, absolutely, I can't really perceive the Spurs or Chelsea camping out on Parliament Square with big banners, regulate sports betting, whereas in Texas, the Texans and others are indeed doing it. So long story short, revenue-wise, the Ontario market's been phenomenally successful. It's generating a lot of added and great value for the province of Ontario itself. And yeah, they're also, if you look at the North American continent globally, so to speak, or as a whole, the Ontario Responsible Gambling Program is one of the leading ones. So they still got, on the flip side, few issues to address, but fewer issues than many US states would have, or at least would be on my list.
I had a great partner in the RGC up there, and Shelley White and the work she does in Canada and broadly is, I think, really impactful and going to shape kind of what the future of RG looks like.
Great.
From an affiliate standpoint, we have decided to not go into Canada because we're not allowed to do any marketings on promotions there. So it's very, very difficult, and compared to the US, it's just not worth it. But again, it might be if you know what you're doing.
Yeah, that's the thing that jumps out. I think jumps out is Ontario's approach with not limiting volume of advertising, but not allowing bonuses and inducements, I think is the term that they use, but not allowing those kind of incentive offers to be included in advertising. And it's the first jurisdiction in North America to take that approach. It's been proposed quite recently in Connecticut. Would we see, I think the conversation around advertising tends to be, you have the Tonko bill on the one hand and really a free market on the other, and at what end of the spectrum does the things get set in the US? And so I think that's something I think I would watch is whether Ontario's approach is on bonuses and inducements. Do any states start to consider that? Because it's may not want to limit the volume of advertising, but dial down the way that things are advertised in terms of the marketing and promotional offers. I do think that's something that is a pertinent case study for the US.
And in terms, if I may very briefly, in terms of the other provinces, at the risk of stating the obvious, there are clear signals that at least few other provinces will go down the Ontario route. I open up in that specific conduct, or as part of that specific conduct and manage scheme that they've got, but for all practical purposes, the legal team of the regulator wouldn't be happy about what I'm going to say, but it's effectively an open licensing system. There's an unlimited number of contracts available to enter into with the government commercial body that's running it for Ontario, so I would suspect that the likes of Alberta, British Columbia will replicate that model. Let's see what Quebec does. They tend to do their own thing historically, and I suppose going forward as well.
Well, we are just out of time. Next up, we'll have the State of the Union trends and forecasts here with Chris Grove. Please join me in thanking the panel for all the insights today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.